The story of Upbuild began in a monastery. On our quest to understand ourselves more deeply, we recognize that it is our attachment to our egos, our identities, that gets in the way of being our true selves. This podcast will help you understand your ego. It will help you better understand your inner world, the motivations, insecurities, and emotions that affect your every action and relationship. Welcome to Upbuilding the Self.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our mini-series on nonviolent communication. We've been discussing the nonviolent communication framework, how to use it in our lives. We've been talking about some of the key teachings, and even deeper than the teachings, we've been talking really about how to communicate with ourselves and with others in a way that is compassionate, empathetic, really meaningful, and allows us to get in touch with our true needs and therefore our true selves. So Rasanath, Hari, it's great to be back with you for episode 3 of this mini-series.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.
So in episode 1, we talked about differentiating needs from strategies. In episode 2, we talked about how all of our emotions are connected to needs. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about OFNR, which, Hari, you've called this really the key central teaching of nonviolent communication. So could you get us started by bringing us into what is this teaching and why do you see it as so central to NVC?
It's putting a lot of the building blocks together. OFNR stands for observations, feelings, needs, requests. Observations, feelings, needs, requests. So we're layering things on top of each other for the purpose of being able to better meet our needs. And that's the whole thing, is that when our needs are met, we feel connected with ourselves and with each other. And so if we can enlist other people, if we can recruit them in a spirited way, in a respectful and appreciative way to help us meet our needs and vice versa. And we'll find that actually our needs get met not only more naturally when we meet other people's needs, but by meeting other people's needs.
Thank you for that introduction. So let's get right into it. O, you said O is for observation. What do we need to know about observation?
Observation is when you look at a situation as if it's what a video camera would tell you happened. And the purpose is for an objective reality to come to light and a ground by which we can mutually stand on. Now, we might see the same thing in different ways, but we're trying to create as much mutuality, shared experience as possible as our starting point so that we're on the same page when we have our communication, and it's more likely we'll be able to meet each other's needs with that shared reality. Now, there's another aspect to this, which is that I also want to defang my communication. And so many times, if we're triggered and we're using this framework, which is very, very powerful for when we're triggered, it's not the only reason to use this framework, as we'll talk more about, but it is very powerful when we're triggered. And if we're triggered, the way we're going to speak about what happened is from that triggered place, and it will therefore be triggering. And observation helps us step outside of that and just really tell what the facts are. And we have to be very careful. This is a critical step, because when we are triggered, we are perceiving the facts different from what is actually factual. And the effort here, and it is an effort, is what would, again, a video camera tell me? And not from a tone of, oh my God, did you see that? Look, it's, this is what happened objectively. But it's really trying to step outside of myself and see what happened here, and to communicate that in a way that will be defanged.
With O, observation, we're trying to remove our interpretation. And I like this term that you use, defang. we've talked in the previous two episodes about how we're trying to make our communication nonviolent. And when I think of a fang, I think of gruesome violence and the potential for danger. And by defanging our observations, what we're sharing about what happened, we can make our communication nonviolent. Okay, very good. So let us move on to the second letter in this acronym. We have F, which stands for feeling. What is the feeling part of OFNR?
So feeling is the emotion that comes up when this happened. I felt this way. So stringing the observation in and layering the feeling on top, you see this situation had an effect on me. The effect was an emotional reaction, or an emotion, if you don't want it to sound so strong. I felt something. We always are feeling something at all times. Every situation gives us some feeling, and always multiple feelings. So zeroing in on what's an important emotion that came to me that resulted from the situation, and being very clear with myself, doing my homework is the key. And then I can leverage that and share that with the other person, taking responsibility for the fact that I had this feeling, not you made me feel this way.
I think what it does also when you take responsibility for your feelings, and this is what I think you're indicating, Hari Prasad, is, and I think this is the objective, and a very key objective is to remove the other person as the cause of my feelings. Because that is typically what triggers really bring up, is that this other person is the cause of my feeling, which means then I have to attack the other person, right? Or I have to go on the defensive. Sometimes attack is the best form of defense. And when you take responsibility for your feelings, you are essentially taking away the blame. You are no longer saying that the other person is responsible for my feelings.
Totally. And Michael, you brought up about defanging that's really very important for nonviolent communication. It's called nonviolent communication for a reason, and blame is the fang.
I'm recalling our discussion from the second episode where we talked about the difference between actual feelings / emotions and stories, which we often frame as feelings. I feel that you meant to do this, or I feel that you were trying to make this happen. And those are not actual feelings. Feelings are sadness or disappointment or happiness or elation or frustration, anger. But so often we forget that. Not even forget that. We are trying to convey something, but we use the language of feelings to convey it in a way that might be more tolerable to the other person, but actually is just as violent as if we explicitly blame them for it.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate, as I shared in that episode, hey, there's a place for your sense of a situation. There's a place for your gut feeling. There's a place for all kinds of different ways of talking about feelings. That's not what we're doing here. That's not the place in the NVC communication. And there's really strong reasoning for that, because we want to know what is the emotion, and we don't want to obfuscate that with all kinds of other things, especially not interpretations and stories, which will only create disconnect from the other person that doesn't see it the same way. So really what I want to do is be as concrete, clear, and clean about this, and truthful, but in a very it's an organized way. There's a discipline and an art to this, that I am feeling angry is so much better than I'm feeling angry because this and this and this and this. And my feeling is that you did this, and right. It tames the whole situation, and it allows us to speak in a way where you might actually understand me. And that's what I want. I want understanding, and the other person wants understanding. So I'm trying to speak in a way that will be understandable and hopefully more understanding as well. So we're leaving out those other kinds of feelings. They can come at another time. That's fine. There's a place for them. But the other thing I really want to drive home, as I shared in previous episode, is if you can't tell me what your emotion is, your other kinds of feelings are very suspicious. If you are so wrapped up and so unclear, so carried away by a situation that you're unclear what is the emotion, or you're not in touch with yourself, or you're not willing to go there, then that doesn't make it really credible what you're sharing about your sense of a situation, because you're not connected to yourself. You're not connected to reality.
Recently, I was just having a conversation that somebody said, but I shouldn't be feeling that way. I shouldn't be feeling that way. And what I recognized was that somehow we attach a certain righteousness to the feeling. Either it's the right feeling to have, or it's not the right feeling to have. And as soon as we either over justify it or we ignore it, which is again why the observer stance is important, because when you observe your feelings, you can actually look at your feelings without judgment.
Thank you. So, N for needs. What's this one all about?
The need is what's behind the emotion. And if you now weave together the observation, the feeling, and the need, you see the thread that the situation produced a feeling in me, and the feeling is based on a need. So when this happened, I felt this way because I'm looking for something, and it did or didn't happen. And it either happened in a big way or in a small way. So the degree of my emotion, as we talked about in our previous episodes, the degree of my emotion is based on the degree to which my need is met or unmet. So I'll have a bigger emotion based on how well or how poorly my need is being met. And so the situation produces a feeling that clues me in. I'm looking for something. I need help to meet this need.
All right, you said before we were recording today something when we were talking about needs that really struck me, that this is our why.
I agree with you. And my experience is that even when we don't go through these steps, there is always a why. I think this brings us to the deepest why. And it's a vulnerable why, too, which is the only place from which we can actually solve the problem.
What I always think is that this demystifies my emotions. Oh, that's why I feel the way I do. And it's so clean. It's so clear. It's beautiful, actually. The NVC framework is so intuitive. It's ingenious. It's almost too simple and obvious. And yet it's a whole reprogramming, because it's so different from how we think and act. And so when you see that there's a need behind every emotion, it's like, yeah, of course, I should have known that, or I do know that. But wait a minute, what happens when you actually are conscious of that? When it's not like, yeah, of course, but it's conscious. And then what to speak of, I do something with that knowledge. So it demystifies the emotions, and it demystifies a significant part of our inner world. And that allows us to then orient and navigate our inner world and our external world with just a goodness, an effectiveness, a sharpness, and an ability to reach people and to be true to myself, which is profound.
I like that word, demystify. It's very attractive. I'm excited to get into an example here so we can demystify some things. Let's get into the last letter, R, request, and then we'll go through an example.
So the request is the byproduct of doing my homework about what is the situation that caused the feeling that is based on a need. And now it's, what am I going to do with that? So I have a need. It was either met very well, and I want to acknowledge that and ask somebody to reinforce that out of gratitude, which is a wonderful way to use this framework. So it can be that I'm making a request, hey, can you keep doing this? And it's very concrete and clear what you did that affects me, that meets my need. Or more commonly, when I'm triggered, when there's a conflict, when there's a situation where I'm feeling bereft in some way, I say, hey, here's what would really help me. Could you do this? And the key is it has to be super specific. It has to be very clear and it has to be easily actionable. It shouldn't be overwhelming to the person. It shouldn't be 100 things. It should be one thing that would go a long way and that I know is doable for the other person and that I'm not expecting them to do. I acknowledge their free will. And if they did it because I'm saying they have to do it, that's not okay. And if I'm saying that, well, they should want to do it, and so I'm giving them the opportunity, how selfless I am, how magnanimous I am, you should want to do this, and I'm just telling you to do it, which you should want to do, that's also not what we're talking about. That again, is a demand. We talked about this in a previous episode. A pure request is motivating. It's inspiring.
Just last week, I was talking to a client, and we were talking about authenticity, and he was just talking about how when he's authentic, it's so disarming for the other person. And I just pointed out that as soon as authenticity becomes a strategy, you've compromised it. And that's the same principle here, that as soon as you're attached to the request as a strategy to an outcome, then you might find yourself in the same place where you started. I'm making a request. I'm coming so sincerely. Why is it so hard for you to meet me?
Here's the fine line. Because this is vulnerable, there's a hidden expectation. You're going to appreciate my vulnerability and you're not going to let me down. Hey, I just did all my homework and it was really hard for me to do that. And it was really hard for me to make myself vulnerable in expressing it. It was hard enough for me to do the internal homework to figure all this out. And now I'm expressing it in a way that leaves me very vulnerable. And there can be attached to this, even unwittingly or unbeknownst to us, a how dare you? How dare you not, after all that I put in to convey this in the nicest, healthiest, most constructive way possible. And you should want to do this anyway, right? There's always that sense that creeps in. Why do you not want to meet my needs? But this kills the connection. And it makes it, when the person does agree, it's out of fear. It's not out of inspiration. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There is more, but you should want to. You're not inspired to? How could you? How dare you? So it all comes down to, the request and the reaction to the request is very revealing of everything else. Did we really do our homework? Did we really become vulnerable and connection creating? Did we really approach with that spirit of creating connection? Or is there more work to do?
I always keep in mind what Brene Brown says about everything. Not what she says about everything, but she says this one specific phrase: we're here to get it right, not to be right. That can be applied for everything, is what I was meaning to say. And I feel like that's very applicable here also, because we're talking about a very high bar in terms of what it would ideally look like to go through OFNR. And we want to say that we're here to try to get it right, not to be right. And this stuff takes practice, and it's also okay to make a request and to have expectations and to still get hurt if those expectations are not met.
Michael, I really appreciate that. Here's the thing. It's not about feeling guilty for not reaching the bar. It's about what's going to be most effective. Don't be scratching your head when you don't reach the bar and you are coming out with a lot of expectations and hurt, and the other person is not receptive, because that's, again, the self-fulfilling prophecy. And the whole point of NVC is to turn that on its head, to actually give us something that was not here before.
Thank you. So let's get into an example so we can make this very clear. So we have two people in a relationship. One partner is the breadwinner. They're the one who is working for a living. The other partner is not working for a living or works less or part-time, something like that, and is feeling like the person who does work is not appreciating them for everything else that they do. There's a particular feeling that the person who is working doesn't spend a lot of time with them. How would we actually go through the steps of OFNR here?
Michael, I liked your framing of this when we were talking about it earlier. The observation might be that we don't have dinner together as a couple any night of the week, let's say. That's an observation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how does that make me feel? The emotion is typically anger. There are many emotions there. And behind the anger is actually sadness, but sadness is more vulnerable. And so I typically choose to make anger more prominent. And that allows me to feel more control and more self-righteousness and like, I'm going to do something about this. I get angry really easily. I feel violated. How do you not want to spend more time with me? I feel so angry. And then the need behind that, there are, again, many needs. One of them could be connection, which is sort of behind everything, but that could be a concrete need, connection. I feel the disconnect. Another need could be feeling appreciated, because you would want to spend more time with me if you appreciated me, but you're totally okay not having any quality time together. That is a clear message. You don't appreciate me. So my need for appreciation is not being met. Now, of course, I'm giving you also a lot of the inner monologue, all of the stuff that we would want to clean out of the communication when we actually come to the point of conveying it. But this is the inner homework. The bulk of this is not what we say. The bulk of this is the inner work. So sorting through all of that stuff is the key. And then we'll be fit to bring it to the table with somebody else. So now I recognize I have a need for appreciation. And the request could be that we at least have 2 nights a week, or even 1 night a week. Let's start small. 1 night a week, dinner together, just you and me. That could be a request. And I think, yeah, then I'll feel more appreciation. Or it could be that actually I feel pretty unseen. So there's a need to be seen. And that ties to my need for appreciation. And if I want to focus on appreciation, I sort of have to go into that as well. So I might request, hey, I'm doing so much stuff, and I have a need for acknowledgement as well. So if you put that all together and you just focus on the need for appreciation, recognizing that these other things are there, it might look like a request for, could you see if when I'm taking out the trash, if you feel grateful for that service that I'm doing for the household, could you just share that with me?
I really like how you said that this is my inner monologue, because you did share a lot to really bring us in with each of the different steps about how you're feeling and what some of the other self-talk might be in that. And if we were to clean it up, I'll just try to summarize what I think I heard. There's an observation here that, and let's make it really recent. Last week, we didn't have dinner together at any point. So 0 nights out of 7, we had dinner. That's what a videotape would actually have recorded if it was pointing at the dinner table. Then there's my feelings about that are anger, sadness, and loneliness, let's say. And then I see that my need is appreciation and acknowledgement, which are actually underneath the feelings of anger and sadness and loneliness. And then finally, my request is that, and maybe it's directly, you shared 2 different requests. And I think they're interesting side by side. The first is based on the observation, could we have dinner together one night a week? And you're free to accept that, say yes. You're free to say, no, I can't actually do that. Or maybe there's some negotiation that might start to happen after that. Or maybe through this whole process, I've realized that it's not actually having the dinner that is going to be the strategy that will best meet my need, but some acknowledgement around everything else that I do for the house. And so I'm making it really specific. Could you actually acknowledge me if you feel grateful when I take out the garbage? Because that's a hard thing for me to do, and that would feel really good.
Yeah, I recognize that behind this is really a need for appreciation. And if I felt that you appreciated what I was doing for you, then that would go a long way in my feeling connected, regardless of the amount of time we spend together, if time is an obstacle. Now, I can make both requests, but I should really weigh out how much is it going to help me, one versus the other, and is it really important that I make both? And one request at a time, because otherwise it's overwhelming. And you may come out with a list of agreements at the end of a conversation, and that's all right. But it's not always the way to go. It's better to make it focused and really easy, and to just be satisfied with a little action rather than a list of things. Because that little action of, I may want to feel seen and appreciated for so many more things than just taking out the trash. But I'm going to start with that because that's going to inject new energy into our relationship. And that's going to create a new way of your seeing the situation and seeing me. It's not that there's any limit to the number of requests. It's just we have to be very intelligent and sensitive about how and how often we make them. That's really key. And the same goes for emotions and needs. I could say, yeah, as you mentioned, I feel sad, I feel angry, and I feel lonely. And with needs, I could say, well, I have a need for appreciation, I have a need to be seen, I have a need to be acknowledged, and I have a need for connection. But as soon as I start giving all of those, it starts to become like a list of grievances, very subtly. It's like, I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm lonely and I have this need for appreciation and this need for acknowledgement and this need to be seen and this need for connection. And if you just chose one, you'd be way more effective in both of those cases.
Yeah. So the specificity and narrowing it down really helps here.
And they will meet the other needs. If you meet the need for appreciation, you'll start to feel more seen.
So, Hari, you had mentioned that this can be a great tool when we're delivering somebody information about how we're feeling in a negative way, when we're feeling not great or uncomfortable or some negatively balanced emotion. But we can also use this to share our positive feelings or to share positive feedback so that somebody knows what we appreciate about them and what requests we might have, which would, in those situations, probably looks like, I want you to keep doing what you're doing. So we've covered needs versus strategies. We've covered needs as connected to feelings. And now we've put it all together with OFNR, observations, feelings, needs, and requests. And we are going to have one more episode on NVC, which we will excitedly share with you when we get there. And for now, is there anything that either of you would like to share in closing?
It takes hard work to practice. As I was listening to Hari Prasad share this, I also recognize the enormity of the work because it's not easy. And yet, there is really no other way, is how I see it. From a point of view of taking full responsibility for our needs and our behavior. And so what I'm taking away from this is to become a practitioner and to keep going back to the practice even when I don't get it right. Because if I give up on the practice itself, there is no way I will ever get it right.
Thank you both for your time today, as always. And I'm really excited to be back for episode 4 to close out the series.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, me too. Me too. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone listening.
Thank you for listening to Upbuilding the Self. Upbuild is a leadership development company that offers workshops, coaching, and other services to help you on the path towards being your best self, free from the shackles of the ego. To learn more about our work, visit our website, upbuild.com, and sign up for our newsletter to gain access to podcasts, reflections, and upcoming events. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes to leave us a review so that others can find and benefit from the podcast. We look forward to being with you again next time.